there. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang today reiterated the positions and policies of the Chinese government regarding several critical issues in his speech at the World Economic Forum in Tianjin. Meanwhile, the United States is about to slap new tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods from next week, escalating the ongoing trade war yet again. What opportunities will be brought with the tide of the fourth industrial revolution? How can China best manage the difficulties it faces during the continued industrial transformation? And what messages is China delivering to the world through its current policies and goals? To take a closer look at the ongoing summer Davos in Tianjin, I'm happy to be joined by Professor Jiang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics and Professor Paul Gillis from Guanghua School of Management at Peking University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. And before we start, let's take a quick look at this.
More than 2,000 participants from over 100 countries are taking part in this three-day summer Davos in Tianjin. The theme of this year's meeting is Shaping Innovative Societies in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a transformation powered by new technologies, including artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and gene editing. It's already impacting societies, economies, and geopolitical landscapes. At the opening ceremony, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang stressed the significance of this new industrial revolution.
In the age of globalization, a new round of industrial revolution has come into being. We have gone through several rounds of industrial revolutions, and they have all boosted the globalization of trade. And this new round of industrial revolution came into being against the background of globalization, at a time when mankind was faced with new challenges and had to come up with new wisdom to respond to these new challenges.
2018 marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. Premier Li once again insisted that China will continue to deepen reform and open the economy.
China's reform and opening up in the past 4 decades is also in keeping with the trend of globalization. In his keynote speech at the Winter Davos Forum early last year, President Xi Jinping stated once again China's firm commitment to opening up. China will further open itself at a faster pace.
Premier Li also expressed confidence in China's economy.
Since the start of this year, we have significantly eased restrictions on market access to finance and other services sector. These measures will be further implemented. And this is a decision made by China for further opening up. This is for our domestic industrial transformation and upgrading, and for providing Chinese consumers with more options.
Gentlemen, what message does Premier Li Keqiang deliver at the opening ceremony?
You know, I believe that what he was doing is providing a more reassuring message that despite all the difficulties that we have right now, particularly with the trade war and the economic challenges, that they are in control and that there are solutions that can be applied, and we're not looking at the end of the world.
I think, in addition to this, as Paul just said, I think he spent a lot of time talking about globalization. I mean, I counted how many times he mentioned that word in his speech. I think he's delivering the message that China is still very much keen on defending the multilateral system. And he mentioned that there are problems with globalization. There are people, he said, that haven't benefited from globalization, haven't reaped the dividends of globalization. And he talks about an inclusive growth model, inclusive development model. And I think that's a very important message in the sense that China is still an adamant defender of multilateralism, of the institutions and organizations that have kept the world safe and peaceful and prosperous for the last 70 years.
I see very interesting differences between the perspectives of you in analyzing the message that Premier Li Keqiang delivers. Yes, indeed, he talked a lot about the fourth industrial revolution. That's perhaps a major mission, a mandate by this generation of the Chinese leadership to conduct a peaceful transformation of the industry, upgrading the chain from a low value added to high value added through digital technology, big data, artificial intelligence. So what do you think of the prospects for China to move from a labor-intensive manufacturing factory to somewhere higher?
You know, the first industrial revolution really was the steam engine and moving people off the farms. The second one was electricity. The third one was computers and the internet. And the fourth one is probably the most significant of all of them. It may well be. It's artificial intelligence. It's robots. It's autonomous vehicles. It, I think, has great potential. I think, you know, you've seen China rapidly go through these other stages. It kind of missed the Industrial Revolutions the first time around and kind of caught up in the last 30 years. And I think China was particularly well positioned to do very well in the fourth Industrial Revolution. And that's really what is at the root of a lot of these conflicts that we're seeing right now in the trade war, is fear that China is going to win the fourth industrial revolution, and that is where the U.S. would like to wants to continue its leadership that it's had in the previous industrial revolutions.
And do you think basically this is the major concern behind the trade war that President Trump initiated?
Well, there are a couple of reasons behind this, and we have to keep in mind that the people around him have different agendas. I think from my analysis, I think at least first of all, he is very concerned about the trade deficit. He calls it trade loss. Second thing is that he's also concerned about bringing corporate America's operations back to the home states. I think this is a very clear agenda behind him, driven very much by Peter Navarro. And with respect to the prospect of, you know, sort of hampering corporate China and Chinese technologies of catching up with the U.S., that I still have some reservations. You know, I think there are people around him who strongly believe in that. For example, USTR Robert Lighthizer is a big believer in that. But whether he buys into that theory, I think probably the jury is still out there. And I still think that even if he believes in that, I doubt very much he believes the fact that what he's doing, you know, using the tariff methods can actually solve the problem he has in mind. And that's very unlikely. I mean, Chinese technology is going to develop, it's going to evolve on its own, and corporate China is going to innovate and invest in R&D. This is something that a few $billion of tariffs going to stop. That's not going to happen. Right?
Republicans dominate the White House, the House, and the Senate. But what's going to happen after the midterm congressional elections? Do you think Democrats are likely to take over the House, and therefore his policy options will be undermined due to domestic opposition?
Well, the polls do indicate that it's very likely Democrats will take over at least one branch of government, probably the House of Representatives. They have a chance maybe taking the Senate. And that's going to make life more difficult for Trump. But on the trade wars, he hasn't relied on Congress. I don't think he could have gotten these tariffs through the Republican House and Senate. I don't think they would support that, because they're more tied to the traditional business, which like the multilateral trade systems that we were in. Republicans were always the advocates of free trade. And Trump is part of a populist movement that comes from, that we saw that gave rise to Trump. It also gave rise to Brexit. And it's really fueled by the people who were left behind in globalization.
By deplorables.
And they're not going to go away with just an election or two. And they're going to be around after Trump. So this populism problem isn't going to go away quickly.
So Jack Ma of Alibaba said recently that the trade war is likely to continue for another 2 decades. Do you buy his idea? Or even longer than 2 decades?
I still have a little bit of faith and confidence that probably we will have a way out. I think, I look at a couple of signs. For example, if you look at the telephone conversation he had with Bob Woodward in trying to stop his book, he actually mentioned that. He said, I am actually trying to work out the biggest trade deals ever. And he also mentioned, the book also mentioned, the conversation also mentioned that he once scolded Wilbur Ross saying that I don't need your negotiation. You are past your prime.
Yeah,
okay?
you're the old school.
You are the
right.
old school. So that probably indicates that he is probably still looking for a solution, looking for a trade deal. But the thing is that
Reimposing maximum pressure.
right. So I would still interpret the current actions, all of the stuff he's been doing, still as a pre-play to the ultimate negotiation of the mother of all negotiations between him and our president. And he is going to, if it's going to happen, my hope and my guess is that there will be a way out, and he's going to come out and claim victory, personally.
Are you optimistic that this downturn will be reversed through some surprising and dramatic decision at the top level of the power echelon?
I think we're going to need some big shocks to the system before it happens, and that could be a huge drop in the stock market or a major change in public opinion. It could be elections in the United States or the UK that start to change this thing. But you see, what's really motivating Trump is he wants these jobs to come back to America. But the supply chains are well established now in China. And it's not something that in a matter of months that somebody like Apple could start to make iPhones in California instead of making them in China. That's not going to happen overnight. Now, it may happen if the trade war goes on long enough. Some of this may start to happen. And that may encourage people to say, yes, we're on the right track. If all people see is the pain that's going to come, the higher prices and the loss of jobs, then it's a question whether there'll be enough patience to wait for the other things to happen.
The U.S. trade representative has completed negotiations with Mexico, and they are hopefully finding a same solution to the trade disputes between European Union and the United States, between Canada and the United States. And therefore, one recent article of a Japanese newspaper calls for forging an alignment, kind of alliance between the European Union, the United States, and other allies to ask for greater transparency and protection of the intellectual property rights when they deal with the Chinese economy. Instead of like what President Trump is doing, unilaterally changing the rules of the WTO, slapping punitive tariffs on Chinese goods, the article says this is wrong. This is obviously a violation of the rules for a country that ironically calls for respect for rules. But they themselves provocatively trying to change the status quo, the legal status quo of the WTO. So what do you think of this prospect for American allies and the very close business partners to get united in their effort to change the industrial policies of the Chinese government?
See, I think the biggest mistake that Trump made was to really start a war with all of the allies.
All
first.
fronts.
And he went everywhere. He went after the Canadians. He went after the Mexicans. He went after the Germans for exporting BMWs to America, actually making them in America. And what he really needed to do was to, if he really wanted to change some of the things in China, was to get them all on the same page and pressuring China to make the changes they need to make. But I don't think they understand what changes they want. I mean, some of them, like Lighthizer, have some views of things that they want, such as the intellectual property protection. But most of those issues are not going to do, even if China were to concede everything that the U.S. asked for, isn't going to fix what Trump's base wants. Which is they want those high-paying manufacturing jobs that were around in the 1960s in America to come back, and they're not coming back. They don't even exist in China anymore.
The scenario you describe, Ray, is that something that I think the Chinese government is very concerned about. Fortunately, it's not happening. It's not happening because I think other countries are also quite concerned about them being the target next. For example, and I'll give you some examples. Even Japan itself, I don't think the Japanese government may really buy into this theory, because look at what happened to Japan. Shinzo Abe was the first leader going to America to talk to Donald Trump after his inauguration. But Japan so far really benefit anything from the United States. It wasn't exempted from Section 232 investigation. It wasn't exempted benefit from other, potential tariff measures. Look at Canada. I mean, they got an intense argument with Trudeau personally. So I don't think these countries would really buy into that theory and building an alliance together with the United States against China. And furthermore, I think some European countries, they have huge investment interests in China. Germany, for example.
After China is an important part of the global chain.
Right, exactly.
We have a sizable market of
not just important,
middle-class
it's
consumers.
critical.
Very critical,
every
yes,
country.
for the European and Canadians to give a second thought. The other major issue that Premier Li Keqiang addressed in his presentation is the future of the small and medium-sized enterprises, the private sector. There are fears, even a sense of panic among the consumers and investors in China that this SOE will make a strong and aggressive inroad into the economic domain at the cost of the SME. So what do you think of the therapy that the Premier Li Keqiang gave?
Well, one of the things he said, I think, should be of some comfort there, and that was that one of the challenges that private enterprise has in China has been access to funds, access to money. And he said, we've got a lot of money, we've got a deep pool, we just have to figure out how to break down the channels to get it out. And that's encouraging, I think, at a time when I think there was a sentiment that perhaps China was not so interested in developing its private sector, which has led in job creation for many years now in China.
And I'm afraid confidence of both consumers and private investors have been seriously undermined due to a lot of things, such as the high-handed crackdown on the P2P practices. And we see the ongoing outbound flow of the capital. So what do you think of the issue of confidence? What can be done to boost the confidence of consumers and investors?
Yeah, I think the concern is very real. The market sentiment right now isn't that good. I think I wouldn't be considering the fact that there have been a lot of business people, businessmen, rich businessmen, very hesitant to make investment. They probably were thinking about sending money outside of China, if not their kids already out there outside of China. So these are very real issues, very real concerns, and I think our government needs to really do something substantive. I mean, currently economically, it's very. I think it's starting to see a very difficult time with this looming trade war, and the effect of tariffs are going to kick in after a few months. So this is a very difficult time, and the private sector is a very hard time, and they need help. So the things you mentioned, the recent discussion about going back to the old days again and getting rid of the private companies is just so harmful to our economy. And we still have to keep in mind that 80% of the jobs are created. I mean, the private sector is the workhorse of creating jobs. Our economy wouldn't have been at current stage without the robust development of the private sector. And I especially want to mention the private sector's role in pushing and developing our new technology, new industries, internet. In the internet space, there's not a single SOE. Every company is a private company.
The private companies, the private technology companies contributed 70% to the innovation of this country. 70%.
Yeah.
60% GDP, 50% tax. That's a lot.
That's
absolutely critical. And I think their review, they felt like they were unwanted. And I think these were some reassurance from Li Keqiang that they are still important and that they are valued and are not just going to be pushed into state-owned enterprises.
And what about the tax policies for the...
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I just want to about to say this. I think the hallmark of his speech today is tax reduction. He mentioned numerous times the importance of tax reduction, and together with it, the sort of a more relaxed regulatory oversight, smaller government, stuff like that. The tax burden on corporate China and on every citizen is very high. Let's face the fact. This is very high in China on average. I think the problem with that is the people who are actually making decisions about these tax issues are the very people who are collecting the taxes. And when you leave the tax code writing right to these people, the tax code book just keeps thicker and thicker. I give you one example. When the oil price drops down several years ago, due to lack of tax revenues, the government gradually increased sales taxes on oil and gasoline. But look at what happened today. The price is coming back. There's no talk about taking away these taxes imposed these few years ago.
Rarely does any government ever reduce taxes once they put them in place.
Exactly. It's very easy to add taxes. It's very difficult to reduce taxes. And after all these years, 20 to 30 years, the tax code just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And the tax rate is getting higher and higher and higher. Up to the point, I think, it's starting to really hinder corporate China's investment and future growth. So I think in a world where the Americans are reducing taxes, making the economy more competitive, I think we are just doing ourselves a disservice by not recognizing this problem. Our government needs to step up and give a break to the corporate world, such that they can be more competitive on international scale. Our economy is already the largest economy in the world. We are the largest trading nation in the world. Our corporate China has to be competitive. And how can it be competitive with such a high tax rate? I got a statistics that on average, say a bottle of water, 2 yuan bottle of water, 70 to 50% of that is actually going to the government. I mean, in this kind of environment, including all taxes, value-added tax, sales tax, income tax, and payroll taxes, and fees, and all kinds of fees. So in this kind of environment, the private sector is having a very difficult time. I hope Premier Li will deliver what he talked about, that the tax reduction will be real and will be coming soon.
But let's focus on the issue of innovation. What would be the driving force behind the innovation, given all of these burdens, the tax, the fees? Does that automatically indicate that basically the private sector has lost all hope?
Well, no, I think that by reducing taxes and by reducing regulatory burdens, you help to free up the entrepreneurial spirit of the Chinese people, and that's where the innovation comes from. The innovation isn't going to come because the government decides it ought to happen. It happens by the government getting out of the way and letting it happen. And that's what he's really saying here is let's cut taxes, let's cut the regulatory burden, and then let's let the Chinese people innovate.
But a friend of mine who works for the Silicon Valley in California, in the United States, says, look, overseas venture capitalists are escaping from the Chinese market. Their confidence is sagging, and they are truly worried. So where does the money come from?
From the government. We are now starting to see more and more government-sponsored VC funding feeding into the industry. I think we have a system where local governments tend to compete against each other in terms of providing funding to attract those startup companies to be located in their region. And there are actually many examples that the government-sponsored VC funding organizations are making a lot of investment into
You mean the vision and blueprint of 2025 is actually being put into practice?
Well,
it's fast becoming a reality at least at the provincial level to compete with President Trump.
I won't go that far. I think the China Manufacturing 2025 is a central government initiative. What I'm talking about is the regional governments, provincial governments, city-level governments. They are using their own money trying to foster a VC industry in their region, and this is a little bit different. But whether that model can be successful or not, I'm not sure. I think we are still waiting to see, and whether this kind of a government-funded VC activities will be successful. But other than this, I think there's still also a lot of private funds getting into this.
I would love to ask Paul a question. Do you think the trade war, particularly the U.S. concerns about high-tech primacy, will actually be a driving force to such a degree where the Chinese economy will catch more quickly in our pursuit of 5G and high technology?
Well, yeah, I think that the response of China to this has to be to move forward at full speed. and to try to implement faster than any place else things, new technologies, robotics and 5G and autonomous driving vehicles and things like that, because that's how China is going to be able to sustain its economy with perhaps less of a role in international trade.
But once the two governments, particularly the White House, decides to go back to the Cold War, it has a lot of tools in the box to start the Cold War. It means Chinese economy will be set back by decades. It might also mean a collapse of the Chinese economy.
Yeah, I won't go that far. I mean, there's actually an article in today's Washington Post talking about a bifurcated world. In one world where there's sort of more China-centric economic order, where there's another sort of a separate American-led economic order, and they're competing against each other. And so back to your scenario, so we are in this bifurcated world where we have a world of economies led by China and some developing countries. So whether this model is going to collapse or not, whether China is going to, as you described, that will just fall apart because of in this sort of isolated and confined economic world, I'm not sure. I think
the last issue, gentlemen, is Premier Li Keqiang promised that China would not march on a path of stimulating exports by malevolent devaluation. He pointed out that RMB devaluation could undermine China's interests in the long term. Do you believe it?
Well, I mean, clearly one of the obvious reaction to tariffs is if you devalue the RMB, you basically keep products cheap for Americans, and by whatever you do it. But that was what China was accused of doing for many years, of keeping the renminbi low. They haven't been doing that in recent years, and he's saying we're not doing it now, and we're not planning to do it now. But to keep the value of the renminbi up, they're going to have to keep in place capital controls, currency controls, which not many years ago, everyone thought that we were on the cusp of getting rid of those currency controls and every freely tradable yuan. I don't see that happening now in the foreseeable future.
Chinese leaders have on many occasions stressed the importance of a shared future and shared interests and opposed unilateralism. Do you think what the U.S. is doing now could be a shared threat?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think the United States still plays this very old-style, geopolitical game where you find competing states as a revisionist force. I think our government tends to have a very different perspective on this. I think it could possibly be explained by the fact that U.S. is sitting a sort of incumbent position, dominant position. Of course, he thinks that way, whereas China is sort of more in a challenging, rising power. But regardless of this, I think the track record so far of our foreign policy has been indeed less towards sort of a geopolitical angle, but more towards a shared future. For example, what we're doing in Africa, I think is a very shining example to see that China is not in the game of sort of stirring up conflicts and benefit from this on our own. I mean, we're truly, genuinely, earnestly investing in Africa, trying to help the local population build the connectivity in terms of building roads, building ports, facilities, and railroads. I think this is a noticeable difference from the old style of sort of European engagement in Africa.
Oh, you use the word engagement, but Africans would tend to, cite memories on history, like colonialism. Thank you very much, Paul and John, for participating in this dialogue discussion. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.